Thank you everyone for joining the Diagnostics Investors Panel at Digital RESI November. So today is the first day of the 3-day conference that we have going on from today through Thursday. We have 5 very distinguished panelists, all of which who are eager to share more about their insights and perspectives on investments in the diagnostic space. So with that, I want to turn it over to Jorge Aquino, who will be moderating this session. And yeah, so Jorge, I'll leave it up to you.
Thank you, Claire. It's a pleasure to be here, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Jorge Aquino. I'm Director of Ventures for Johns Hopkins University. We are the group that works directly with and reports directly to the president of Johns Hopkins University. We work to commercialize all Hopkins technologies, and we do this through 3 different groups. The Tech Transfer Office, which is like many other tech transfer offices across the country, except we're the 3rd most active with 400, 500 invention disclosures per year. We also have a corporate partnerships team that works with large organizations, Bayer, AbbVie, those types of groups, to bring sponsored research dollars to the university. And finally, we have a group called Fast Forward that is a suite of resources to support those opportunities when it makes sense to create startups around our technologies. And that starts with educational programs, an active mentor and residence program with seasoned executives that help guide and mentor our companies. We have support services, legal, banking, and accounting. And then we have got incubator facilities as well to house those opportunities near the inventors. And then finally, what I call outsourced business development, which is working with our faculty and our entrepreneurs to help them build their business model, their strategy, and their pitch, and then make introductions to the right investors or the right strategic partners at the right time when it makes sense. My role, I've been there for 5 years now, working to develop relationships with the venture capital community, have grown those opportunities now, and have seen the venture capital to Hopkins companies rise from 150 million per year in venture capital to all Hopkins companies. Now we're at $450, $500 million per year in venture capital for Hopkins startups. So with that, I want to turn it over to our investor panel here. I'll introduce our investors. So the first person I'd like to introduce is Martin Pfister, who's Senior Investment Manager of Life Sciences at High-Tech Grundfonds. Dr. Pfister joined the team in 2010, and HTGF is the largest seed funds in Europe with about 900 million euros under management. It's got an active portfolio of about 260 technology-based portfolio companies. And Dr. Pfister studied medicine and pharmacy in Germany and at New York University Medical School with a PhD in immunology. He started his career in the hospital laboratory and then moved to startup life sciences about 18 years ago, and co-founded 2 companies in the molecular diagnostics space and healthcare services space. At HTGF, he manages a portfolio of 13 life sciences companies, including biotech, medtech, digital health opportunities. I'd also like to introduce Diana Sadaseni, founder and managing director of Panicus Partners. Diana is an investor with a long experience in venture capital. She's a co-founder and general partner at Panicus Partners, an Italian-based venture capital firm that's dedicated to early stage investments in healthcare in Europe and Israel. She has also co-founded and managed 360 Capital Partners, one of the leading venture capital firms in Europe. She has led investments in a number of companies all over Europe and in medical devices and other sectors as well, and has had several IPOs and M&A transactions. Deanna holds a Master of Science in Engineering and an MBA from Luis University. I'd also like to introduce our other panelists, Noel G, who's a principal of Illumina Ventures. Noel joined Illumina Ventures in 2017 and focuses on investments in biopharma and life science tools and diagnostics. Prior to Illumina, Noel was with LEK Consulting, where he developed strategic business insights for biopharma and diagnostics companies. He's helped bootstrap an asthma-focused diagnostics startup, so he has a lot of experience in this space, as well as an IT startup in college, and has played an active role in startup communities at both universities. Noel obtained his PhD in chemistry and chemical biology from the University of California, San Francisco, and a dual BS in biochemistry and physiology and neurobiology from the University of College Park, which is also my alma mater. Jorge Ramirez, principal of HIG BioHealth Partners, is our final panelist. Jorge Ramirez is a principal at HIG BioHealth Partners and focuses on development stage and growth investment opportunities in the health sector. Previously, Jorge was with ProQuest Investments, a healthcare-focused private equity firm. And during his 8 years with ProQuest, the firm raised and fully invested 2 funds totaling $625 million. Jorge has represented ProQuest as an observer on board member on several successful companies. And Jorge has also held operating roles in healthcare companies and was general manager of neurology products at Cyberkinetics Neurotechnology. He led the regulatory and clinical development teams for an epilepsy monitor device and had the P&L responsibility for Cyberkinetics research projects. Jorge earned degrees in neuroscience and Spanish literature from Amherst College, where he graduated magna cum laude, and he earned an MBA from Harvard Business School, where he was a Pfizer Scholar and Social Enterprise Fellow. So with that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to our first investor on the panel, Martin Pfister, to just give us an overview of his group and kind of his thoughts on the diagnostic space.
Okay, well, thank you. This has been a great introduction. Thank you for having me and having us. As you mentioned, we are a rather large investment firm based in Europe, and we see quite a lot of different deals across all industries, but especially also in the life science deal. And I have looked it up. In our 101 life science portfolio companies, current life science portfolio companies, 14 in diagnostics. This can be even broadened up to companies who are, in analytic tools that you may summarize under diagnostics. And the first, I think, the oldest one that we have stems from is a vintage year 2008. We invested in 2008, and the latest one where we sent out a press release today has been invested this year. And in those companies who are in the diagnostic space in all those years, show that you need time. You need time if you do seed investments like we do to develop these kind of projects. Usually in the diagnostic space towards commercial success. Installed base companies, licensing deals or partnerships. And that's one of the major, support that we give in addition to money to the companies, provide support with all the experience that we have. I think we have done 1,600 follow-on financing rounds in the last 15 years. So, and all the problems that you might arise have been there before, and there might be solutions to it. And this also comes up to diagnostics. And we continue to invest in diagnostics, even though with most of the funds, not only, I guess, in Europe, turn towards biotech pharma, but we also, do diagnostics in a wide variety with all the technologies that are around there. So we are agnostic to it.
Perfect, thank you. And I'll turn it over to Diana as well to kind of introduce herself and her fund.
Yeah, sure. A little bit about Panacas, and not pancakes, please, to the audience. Panacas, which is the ancient Greece goddess of full remedy. So very much a cultural reference, and not to pancakes again. So shortly, what we do is we invest any stage in life science company, and when I say any stage, it's really anything from seed to pre-IPO rounds, any size ticket between like $500,000 to 6 or 7, and we often also lead much bigger rounds, and we have led several rounds, 20+ million, gathering, syndicating and gathering, leading and gathering other investors' money. We invest primarily across Europe, but also in Israel and in the US. And we invest for the moment out of about 100 million fund into devices, diagnostic and digital health. But we're now raising a new fund, a larger fund in the range of 120, 150 million, which will also have a portion to address investment in therapeutics. This is in a nutshell. So far, we have built a nice portfolio in diagnostic, among other, of course. I have to say that we have a different appetite according to the segment within diagnostic. The one thing, for example, we like very much to explore, even though the investment thesis is not very obvious, is anything that has to do with new biomarkers. New biomarkers in diagnostic is a big challenge, takes a long time for validation and getting to the market, but at the same time, we understand and we share the big upside potential there. And this is a type of deal, risk reward, that very well fit our appetite. A little bit less of an appetite, but still being considered by the team here, is anything that's like innovating, like hardware to innovating a process in diagnostic. So not necessarily new point of care devices is something that, for example, we don't very much we're not very hot on, but new hardware that would streamline, enabling, making cheaper, making more comfortable, less invasive, any existing process, any existing biomarkers. We also have. We're also open to that. We do less of an appetite. Normally we go later stage in those kind of deals, but we're open to it, and we have some in our portfolio too.
Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Noel to describe and introduce himself.
Thank you. So I'm a principal with Illumina Ventures. Our fund is currently on its second fund, around 200 million. First one was around 230. We invest in both therapeutics and diagnostics, as well as life science tools, actually. So those three areas are our main kind of sweet spots for investment. But of the 20-ish investments we've made so far since the inception of the firm, I'd say at least 6 of them are in diagnostics. So a large fraction of our investments are in diagnostics. 2 of our most recent investments actually happen to be in the diagnostic space. We tend to lead our investments, but are happy to syndicate with other partners. Especially we have people from Europe here, and we love to syndicate with European partners for companies in Europe. We're not agnostic to the region, but we have investments in both Western Europe and North America. Our check size tends to be between 5 to 10 million, which locks us into that early stage investment, especially if we want to be leading most of the rounds, which we typically do. But in terms of diagnostics specifically, we have been, we've had a broader focus than you would think, coming from a place named Illumina Ventures. We've invested in business model innovations as well as technical innovations. For example, one of our most recent investments is in a company called Let's Get Checked, which you may or may not have heard of, but they are an at-home kind of direct-to-consumer diagnostic testing company, and they've struck partnerships with like American Airlines to do all the COVID testing for American Airlines passengers, et cetera. That was a business model innovation, and we're happy to invest in companies that have great business models in that space, even if you don't necessarily have innovations in the actual technical part of the diagnostic. One of our other more recent investments is actually in a point of care diagnostic in the rapid antibiotic susceptibility testing space. And so I guess all that to mention, we're broad in our focus. We're not just looking at pure play genomics investments, even though our name is Illumina Ventures, and we do have a core focus there. We love to look for innovation in whatever form they find, and we're looking forward to meeting many more of you at the conference here.
Thank you. And Jorge, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks again for the invitation and the opportunity to participate on the panel. With respect to diagnostics, Our strategy is similar kind of across the different areas that we invest in. So that's diagnostics, therapeutics, medical devices, health technology, and we have an interest in connected health as well, which is kind of where technology enables a device or a technology, maybe even a diagnostic platform. You know, HIG is a large, diversified private fund, kind of family of private equity funds, and across the firm, you know, we manage about, it's now up to $41 billion of capital. Our strategy is one of many within that larger fund complex. And our biohealth strategy is the only industry vertical or industry specific fund that we have at the firm, where we have not only the focus on healthcare, but also the flexibility to invest in development stage type of investments. The rest of the firm does, you know, kind of middle market buyouts, both from the lower middle market all the way up through, you know, very, very mature companies. So within our strategy, we're looking to put between 10 and looking to put in total between 20 and 25 million into a company over the life of the investment. So our initial bites tend to be between 10 and 15 million, reserving about, you know, 12 or so million for follow-on investments. Things always seem to take a little longer and cost a little more, so we're pretty conservative with respect to reserve and continuing to finance our companies. With respect to diagnostics, I would say our focus is probably a little bit later than most of the panelists here. We're looking at, you know, companies that have developed products, you know, diagnostic products or discrete diagnostic assets that are at or around commercialization. So where there is some view or some line of sight to a reimbursement strategy and a commercialization strategy that is focused. So, you know, we certainly can take risk on innovative business models, innovative delivery, innovative types of approaches. But, you know, certainly after there is some concrete asset or product. And I would say that probably where we focus the majority of our time are, you know, at least on stories that have a direct link to healthcare economics, and where the diagnostic, you know, will provide not only value from the perspective of the patient and clinical care, but, you know, where there's a kind of line of sight or at least an argument, some data that supports cost reduction at some level, either at the level of the user, at the level of the system, at the level of the payer. But that is probably where we are kind of as a theme, probably most focused.
Okay, thank you. And, you know, to get things started, I really would love to kind of just get your thoughts, the panel thoughts on, you know, let's talk a little bit broader view and think about landscape. And what has been the landscape for, what is the current landscape for diagnostics investment that you're seeing? And I'll start with Diana to get the conversation started.
Currently, diagnostic is COVID. I mean, it's been really focusing lots of lab operations, as everybody understands, with the testing for the pandemic. So all kind of tests that have been introduced into the market with very fast and being approved with very fast process, and it's creating a huge volume, of course, and it's creating also, it's absorbing a lot of attention to get that new business. At least it was early this year. I mean, the situation is changing a little bit, and businesses are like going back to normal, and there is again more attention for other segments in diagnostic. This is pretty visible, although I mean still the volumes are still very, very high, and I mean all companies have an angle to it of some kind, and this is absorbing a huge amount of timing from them. So that's the latest news. But I mean, some other, of course, like the acquisition, the recent acquisition of Grail, sort of a pre-revenue company being acquired for significant money. is also like bringing back some excitement, I think, for the sector. I mean, that in our understanding, at least at Panarchis, it has always been here. But I mean, when you invest in a sector, you need comparable of that kind to show that stories can also lead to that kind of return. I mean, although the company has raised a tremendous amount of money but still, I mean, it's a big exit. It's a big multiple for all investors, and we need those stories. So I mean, I think it's a positive momentum as a combination of what was additional business coming from the pandemic and some of these comparable success stories which bring some hype.
Thank you. And anybody else would want to comment on kind of the landscape of funding for diagnostics and where you see it today, where you see it going?
Maybe some two examples for developments. I think that might be a prototype for things going on. Is one as the company investment that we announced today are spin-offs from larger companies that spin out technologies and part of the team and provide these kind of spin-offs with IP and sometimes even with resources and investments. So in this case, it is a spin-off from the ETH Zurich and Roche Diagnostics, something that they have jointly developed. And we have seen this maybe not specific for the diagnostic space, but for other mid-size and larger companies that, they take out technologies and ideas, molecules, devices that they don't develop any further under their own roof, and they find people from within these large companies that then become entrepreneurs and start a small company. So it's an interesting development. And the second one, I think, is the combination of more traditional diagnostics technologies. For instance, one of the companies in my portfolio, they measure biomarkers ELISA-based, but not only biomarkers, but the ratio between those biomarkers in certain conditions using algorithms and artificial intelligence. So this combination of traditional established technologies with new edges and new developments, that's a development I think that we see much more, and I think the other two, Noel and Jorge, can also see that these kind of developments come.
I'd say the other thing I would add in terms of what's interesting about this sector that may not have been true several years ago. And I have to say that as an investment firm, or as our fund has evolved over time, we did not have a huge historical focus or a focus historically on diagnostics. But if you look at the public markets, there is excitement. If you look at issues like Castle, they're on a tear. Verisight, Exact in terms of recovery from the initial downturn, coming into the COVID pandemic. I have to say, public equities are on the move. We invested in the last private round of a rheumatology diagnostics company in the middle of last year, and then subsequently took it public 3 months later. So there has been a lot of interest in the public equity markets, which makes other investors take notice and say, well, if there's actually a public market for these kinds of stories that are high growth, early revenue types of opportunities, well, maybe there is kind of interest kind of bleeding back down into the private equity markets. At the end of the day, it really is all connected. So, when I look at the landscape, I see enthusiasm, from the public guys, and that makes me as a private equity investor more likely to dip my toe in and, think creatively about what the exit could be. It doesn't just have to be an M&A anymore. There's actually a path to liquidity. IPOs it's a longer path to liquidity. Nobody gets out, on the heels of the IPO, but it's, you know, one step along the yellow brick road.
Yeah, and kind of adding to that, would love to kind of get your thoughts as a group. You know, I think you're right. I think there's starting to be excitement in the public sector and things like that. In the therapeutic side, you know, seed and Series A investments, you know, they happen at preclinical, really early stages. What is a seed investment? What is a Series A investment? What type of development has happened for companies that are looking at kind of those seed, Series A type early stage investments? What does early stage mean in diagnostics?
I'll start with this one. We invested in a seed company called Delphi that's out of Johns Hopkins. And if you look at where they were in terms of the data that they've published and that they collected, they were very much in line with where you see therapeutics startups are similarly at the series seed for their investments. So when you think about the amount of proof of concept data and the de-risking of a particular biology that's either newly discovered or something that you've built a technology around, I feel like they're very similar at this point than they used to be. We see, like Deanna mentioned, a lot of companies targeting COVID. Right now, everything's COVID. But if you look at the companies that have come in and pitched, I'd say over the last year, instead of just touting some new technology development, some new flavor of rapid PCR or whatnot, they've also come hand in hand with samples that they've run to show a lot more data on the actual, you know, sensitivity, specificity, and then data on the true and negative predictive values of the samples and the target populations. I think that's changed for the better, actually, over the last year. Perhaps because, you know, it's because access to samples is a little easier right now, especially if everyone's trying to do something COVID related. I don't know, but I think the trend itself, I hope it stays true, because we always need to see more data before we get involved with an investment. And that wasn't always true for diagnostics companies.
And Martin, any thoughts on kind of when you think of these early seed stage investments, you know, what are the things that they need to start doing and to be prepared for a seed stage? What are the things they should have looked at and have already put in place?
Yeah, well, next to the technology that, you know, that is usually new, exciting, you know, brings some new cutting edge developments to the table. I think what we are looking more is management and how they handle, or that if they think about topics that are later than just the technology development and the CE mark that you have to get, or FDA mark, 15K or whatever in the US. So we used to do deals that are more geared toward technology development, you know, and getting these registrations. But now we ask for an idea how to commercialize the idea, and most of all, if you have a medical need, who's going to pay for it? Because this is the crucial point, and Europe is very fragmented in this sense. So if you're successful in Germany, that doesn't mean that you will become successful in selling stuff in Italy, because it's a complete different healthcare system. And in that way, these teams have to have an idea what comes after the product is done, and you might, you know, be able to commercialize it. And maybe European tools and diagnostics company tend to look earlier towards the US than they have done in the last years, because it's a shift back that gaining 510K or PMA in the US is easier than it used to be than Europe with the new legislation on you know, diagnostic registering.
Thank you. Deanna, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll add to that, because I fully share what Martin was saying, but I'll add to that especially in the early days, in the early stage, in diagnostic, the entire patient journey is something that needs to be fully understood. Like how a patient is being diagnosed from the very beginning to the end of a certain diagnosis is something that not all the companies are prepared to address when they come to see us in their early days. Sometimes they have clinical data, an abundance of this clinical data. If they are, for example, an IVD, a company that had some access to some kind of samples, they could really test, and going all the way to validate their sensitivity, specificity. But then sort of not always, they don't always like remember to check the entire patient journey and how that invention, that innovation would be positioned along this journey, whereabout and what and how would then this metric would translate in predictive values given the certain target population, and how this patient journey is different in different geographies. It's fine to take the reference, the major countries, but still, I mean, it's really something that I'm surprised. I've been surprised more than once on sort of lack or lack of clarity or weakness from the team. Something I would really recommend to address early in the process.
And Jorge, any thoughts on kind of early stage investment, what that means, and as they go towards getting from early to you, what should they have done on their progression?
Yeah, I would say for, like I mentioned kind of at the top of the call, we don't often see, or we didn't used to see it, we see it now much more frequently, that any clinical data is collecting health economic data as well, either in parallel or through separate small studies or pilot programs. We've seen a lot of interest among the payers to do pilot type work where you kind of integrate in a small segment of patients, or kind of demonstrate at the level of the payer, at the level of the IDN even, depending on what the diagnostic is, some sort of trial. And so for us, when we think early, that's kind of where we are. It could be, post-approval or post-commercialization, but in it's more kind of like beta launch, I guess, if I were to borrow a term from our, more tech savvy colleagues, where there's at least kind of an initial launch or an initial commercial experience beyond just the folks that help to develop the product. So kind of that's the link, or that's the hook that we're looking for in all of our diagnostics investments.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think, one of the things, the way I think about these things is kind of think about all of the risk aspects of an early stage company. First, there's scientific risk, right? Can you get the sensitivity, the specificity, and things like that? But I think what you guys have added is, and you discussed this earlier in your presentation, Jorge, was reimbursement risk, right? How is this going to get paid? Who's going to pay it? And then we talked a little bit about kind of workflow. Where does this fit in with the patient journey, and just, within the hospital system or primary care, whatever that pathway is? Are there things that, founders and entrepreneurs should be thinking about, and kind of how to tick those boxes, when to tick those boxes, and how to communicate that to investors?
If I may. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay.
No, go ahead,
No,
yeah.
just one quick one. But if I may add to that, comparable histories. I mean, inspirations. Comparable exit is something that we like a lot. And why do you think you'll make money out of it? What's the comparable? I mean, where is this source of inspiration? How do you want to look like in a few years down the line? Why that should provide a big exit? Because we we're going to go through the path and similar to that, this other company that we call comparable, and end up being that, generating that kind of value. This is very inspirational to me, and not always present in pitches, I see.
Yeah, the way I think we like to address this is an awareness for the founder teams that usually very techie like, when they spin out of university or at a research institute, and that are aware of and willing to add people into in a C-level later on, that that are more seasoned in these later stages in business development, in getting access to healthcare systems, in health economics, that there is this awareness that these people have to be added to the team, and this is something that comes as a surprise to some founders, that of course have the great technology in mind, but not the steps beyond.
I guess I would just to echo that a bit. The path to commercialization and diagnostics is not as variable as like a consumer tech company, and I think some people don't quite realize that. But it's a game, and you can learn how to play the game, and there's lots of things you can do to help you assume a dominant position. And part of that is making sure you have the right people that you add to your team along the way to help you play. For example, one thing that I've, the panelists here that I've heard mentioned before is who's going to pay. That's a very easy answer and a hard answer at the same time. But this whole thing about path to reimbursement, who do you need on your side? You need clinicians on your side. Is that enough? And what types of clinicians do you need on your side? I mean, in the US, you need the right clinician KOL to write the guidelines on your side so that you can get your product into guidelines, and thus, prepare yourself for a reimbursement decision from the government agency, which is a completely separate thing from the FDA, for example, right? And these things are all known. The paths are known, what you need to do is known, and then once you know who your competitors and players on the field are, you can figure out what you need to do to put yourself in a great position. But that all comes from making sure you hire the right people along the way, or having the absolute best advisors that are working not just with you once a year, once a month, but very closely to enable you on this path. And thus, I'd say if you have the team member by hiring them, then you should think about hiring or finding advisors, whether in exchange for equity or as consultants, et cetera. You have to add them to your group somehow.
Thank you. And then I wanted to start switching over to going back and thinking about the landscape. Traditionally, diagnostics investing had been a difficult space for funding. It had been a very competitive, very difficult space for funding. Recently, we've seen Thrive Detect, that had large Series A and Series B, got acquired. Grail, which was a large, huge Series A, spinning out of Illumina. Guardant, right? Freenome, those type of opportunities that are doing really well. What is it, that they're doing really well? Where do you see unmet need in the diagnostics where there's a need to be filled, and you think that there's opportunities for companies looking for funding? With Jorge today. Put you on the spot.
I think in terms of our deal flow, where I think there is a big need is companies that are trying to create or trying to, the biggest challenge with diagnostics, I think, are, in the transition from being kind of a development company to being a sustainable business. And so we see a lot of kind of one-hit wonder or one-trick pony types of companies. And I think it's not so common among diagnostics to see, real sustainable companies or, high value takeouts on the basis of just one product, right? And And so the challenge is, is your platform flexible enough, powerful enough, broad enough to deliver more than just one test, complementary tests, especially for companies that have relatively early commercial efforts. We see that it's just hard to make a sustainable business because no one product seems to be really ever that huge. Or the call point, can always be leveraged. And so, one of the, I guess, key things that we're looking for is, is there some sizzle on the steak, so to speak? One product that's driving, the real interest, but then others behind it. A pipeline that is, kind of deep enough to where, and far along enough to where you believe that there's, the potential for a sustainable business. That when they get to the point where they're generating revenue, or, as they're growing revenue, that there's going to be more to talk about than just the one test. Unless it's, such a compelling test that one will do it. But if you look at the public company comps and what moves the stock in those deals and in those names, it's pipeline. It's the ability to look at a total addressable market that's growing over time. Not just that we're getting larger and larger share of single digit growth market opportunity, but it's that, in 18 months, we're going to have another test that addresses another $300 or $400 million opportunity. And 2 years after that, or 18 months after that, we're going to have another one. So when you start to stack them all together, we've all done the math, where you can make almost anything a $500 million opportunity. If you multiply, the couple more patients based on aging population and, ever growing price, taking price increases, we can all get to 5, but that's not so believable. At least what we're looking for and where we see the real opportunity is either in putting some companies together, funding a deeper pipeline, or once there's proof of concept, to really kind of invest in the product that's coming behind. Because I think that is what can make a sustainable business in this space.
Thank you. Noel or Diana or Martin, any thoughts on?
Yeah. No, well, I think to get a lot of excitement in diagnostic, you have to look into therapeutics, which is, I mean, where the therapeutic development and the innovation is coming or is lacking because the disease is being diagnosed too late or not accurately enough, and then the prognosis of this patient is bad as a result of late diagnosis and insufficient therapeutic value being generated. So I think there is the exciting part of our job, and to bring that innovation then that can enable a completely different therapeutics development and success. Takes a long time, but it's where the excitement is, in my opinion. And otherwise, I mean, there's a lot of marginal innovation, which is also interesting, but to be, I mean, the sort of the pan cancer, I don't want to get into the discussion there, but the sort of pan cancer concept that you would completely transform and change the industry and get the disease earlier, possibly. It's a big thing. I mean, it's a big thing in terms of therapeutic value this will generate, in terms of treatment, cure, and prognosis. So I think that's what's really hot.
So I would agree, and the only the difference here I'd point out for early stage investors is that I'm assuming most of the people who are watching this panel right now, you're an early stage company, you're not thinking pipeline, and it's probably very far ahead for a company at your stage. And if you look at, and that's okay, right? If you look at Exact Sciences, they've been buying multiple companies because they have one product and they're inorganically growing their company, and that's okay for us investors because we will find those gaps in portfolios and hopefully sell some companies to fill those gaps in the future. That's how we make our money, and of course how you also make money as a entrepreneur. But to Deanna's point, whether you have a platform and you're thinking about spitting out multiple types of applications and products and to generate a pipeline, or if you feel like you have one very differentiated thing that you're trying to do, I think it is important to think about the so what. There's been too many companies that have come to us at an early stage, fantastic technology, very differentiated, new biology that if you dig into seems like it checks out. But at the end of the day, knowledge is not power, it's diagnostics. You have to be able to do something with that information. And Jorge talked about, health economics, et cetera. If you can't change something, if you can't add value to clinical utility somehow, then you don't have a product. I don't care what kind of great information you give. And I think that's key as an early company trying to figure out how to move forward into the market and how to develop a real product down the line. It's an important thing to think about. And maybe you're not there yet, but that's okay too.
Thank you.
In Europe, there has been, just briefly, it has been very popular. And a couple of years ago, everything around personalized diagnostics, right? It didn't live up to the promise, actually. But I think one step back, that's something that we see and like to look at, is individualized diagnostics. So if you can identify or stratify patient groups, with your diagnostics, that's not really personalized, but it's it changes the way how treatment can be done, and it echoes what Diana and Noel said. So this is something that we like to look at, and that's maybe easier and in the lower hanging fruit, and going for this personalized diagnostics that then needs to be partnered with pharma, and then all the challenges that come with.
And thank you. And I'm going to open it up for questions now from the audience. I'll keep asking some questions, but if there's any questions, feel free to ask. Where I wanted to then transition this to is to really start thinking about for our entrepreneurs that are in the audience, how do they think and how do they manage the investment process? What are the things that they should be thinking about in communicating, one, outreach to early stage investors, and then two, communicating their value to early stage investors?
I'm not an early stage investor, but I would be happy to start. Only because I think that there are probably some common themes, irrespective of kind of what stage you invest in. I think fundamentally, with investors and entrepreneurs, I think the key to kind of attracting investors is developing a relationship over time where, it's kind of based on achieving milestones. So, I can't think of an investment that we've made in the last 6 or 7 years that has been, kind of the result of the first cold interaction or the first initial interaction. We track companies over time. I think probably most investors do, irrespective of stage. And, nothing makes us smile more broadly than when we see a company over time say, okay, it's January, it's JP Morgan. And when we used to go to JP Morgan, here are 4 things that we're going to accomplish over the course of the next 6 months. And then you meet with them in June and they've ticked off 3 of them. And they said, we're still working on number 4, but we've added 2 or 3 more. And then you meet with them at JP Morgan the next year and they're, they've kind of hit the milestones that they set out for themselves. We all keep records and CRMs to keep notes of, what companies, are saying and what companies are achieving over time. And I would say that, this is a long-term business and there, business cards may change, but the people, the faces usually stay the same. And so as you see people develop in their careers over time and their companies mature over time, even at the earliest stage, if you're starting with an idea and developing your technology, whatever your milestones are, I would say when you are an entrepreneur, to be very mindful that everybody's looking, everybody's taking notes, And you will build credibility over time if you do what you say you're going to do. And that's probably true in personal relationships too, but that's a different matter. I think we all like to do business with people that we think are reliable and the people that hit their milestones. So I guess that would be my advice.
Noel, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd generally agree with that. I mean, so the companies that we deal with are typically much earlier. So, I mean, one thing is, don't be shy. If you can get an introduction from someone, then please do so. But even if you don't, I still screen through cold decks at the very least, because that's part of the game for us as investors, right? We have to find the companies to invest in. So make sure you're sending things out and don't hold back. That being said, on the flip side, I would also say try to, if you can, get a sense for what a particular investor requires before investing in your company. And you can usually do that just by looking through their portfolio, seeing what types of companies they've invested in and at what stage. Because when you a lot of times don't have a track record and you're starting out and you're trying to raise your first round, it's a much harder sell if you come around the second time 3 years later raising a Series A that you couldn't raise 3 years ago. It just is. If we've seen you 3 years ago, you haven't been able to do much, and then you're coming around saying, okay, now we can do it. I might be excited, but that doesn't mean other members of our team are excited. And remember that investors they're not just one person driving everything. We have a group of people usually that sit on an investment team. And so preparing a pitch that's tailored to the right investor, I think, is actually quite important. It shows a lot of maturity in the entrepreneur, and it helps a lot in terms of progressing to the next stage of the dance that we have in an investment cycle before we get to a term sheet.
Yeah, I would like to support this, and maybe to add that you don't have to be afraid to show science and data, real data and graphs and things that are published. Maybe that's a newer trend that comes down from the e-commerce side. We see very nicely done pitches, with not a lot of science in it and not a lot of data, where you try to please investors, with a good outlay rather than, deep data. But most of the, at least and early stage investors, and there's nothing much than, the data that you can base your trust upon investing in the company. So this is an important one. Show data and graphs and science behind the pitch.
And my 2 cents to add to that is, please listen the feedback that is given, because investors, at least at first sight, have more or less the same reactions. It's not going to be very different one to another. The key questions will come out with the first investor you meet, provided that is a life science focused venture capital, and not someone that sort of improvise on the sector, of course. But the key questions, and make sure they if you go to 1 or 2 meetings you have, or 3 maximum, you have the set of questions that are not being answered by the material you have produced, and do answer those questions too before you address everybody else in the industry. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think that was those are great points. I think one is developing a good strategy for outreach, making sure that you understand who the investors are that you're reaching out to, making sure you understand kind of what are the types of investments they make. Because if you're going for a seed stage investment, it doesn't make sense to go and contact Jorge on a seed stage investment opportunity. You really need to understand who your investor is and what that person looks for, what that group looks for. I also think Noel's comment here on, making sure that the discussion that you're having in relation to when you're raising capital. Go out and get advice, but making sure that you're talking and letting them know that it's a meeting to introduce your company, but not necessarily initially for investment. Because again, if you've been around for 2 years raising a Series A, it's going to raise a lot of questions from investors and cause a lot of issues. You know, in kind of those types of, in that vein, how should a company think about developing an outreach strategy to reach investors? What are the key things they should think about from a strategic standpoint of investor outreach?
Well, one obvious thing is that it takes time. You know, raising a round takes at least 6 months, and you better do it when you still have liquidity, you know, for 12 months. So, and you're not, you know, back against the wall. So you have enough runway to raise it, and the 6 months is a rather smooth process from, you know, having a pitch and getting a check paid for the first milestone. So it takes time.
And what would you say? Go ahead, Noel. I think you were about to say something.
No, it's, you know, if we're, you know, at the stage of giving advice to people, you should, if you're an entrepreneur, you should ask other entrepreneurs for introductions to investors. I think the best companies for us have always come through our entrepreneur network or some other form of personal network. And it's, I understand that a lot of companies, when they come and talk to me, they say, oh, please refer me to other investors. It's much harder for someone who's on my side of the table to introduce you to somebody else if I haven't invested in your company and I don't know you that well, right? So if you have other entrepreneurs, they're usually a great resource for telling you who they like, who they don't like, and potentially giving you that nice introduction to an investor.
And with our, you know, we've got 2 minutes left in this discussion. With the 2 minutes, I'd like to kind of just turn it over to all of you. And just, what is the one piece of advice that you would give our entrepreneurs that are online watching when it comes to fundraising in terms of a diagnostic company? What's the one piece of advice? No,
without repeating ourselves.
I know.
What's the most, you can repeat yourself. What's the most important thing that you think they should leave today with?
Try.
Go ahead, Diana.
No, go ahead, Mark.
Go, Martin.
No one. It's a common one, but be brave. That's you have to be brave, and you're gonna succeed.
Indiana, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, I would say something unpopular. Consider giving up. It's very unpopular, but I mean, sometimes there are companies which they can't find money just because in the end, I mean, the investment thesis doesn't make sense. And at some point, consider giving up.
I'm going to steal Martin's insights from earlier in this call and pretend it's my own, but you know, have self-awareness and build out a team where you think there are gaps on your current team, because the team is just so important in success.
And Jorge, last one.
I would say rather than give up, you know, my perspective is that there's no one who's going to be a bigger champion for your own technology than you. And I think it's important to be optimistic to actually get there and raise the money. However, I caution entrepreneurs against maniacal dilution sensitivity. There's nothing turns folks off more than initial, you know, introductory meetings and then having the discussion center around valuation and valuation expectations. You know, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And you know, I would caution entrepreneurs to just be open to listen to the market feedback on valuation before putting a stake in the ground.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And with that, I will close the panel. Thank you so much to all our panelists, and thank you to all our attendees today. Claire, let us know if there's anything you need from us, but thank you for such a wonderful panel and letting us know about the opportunities in diagnostics investment.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. It's great to be here, and a good conference to all.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Indeed, it was a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye-bye.